The void that hungers. The sands of Hueco Mundo had witnessed countless horrors across millennia, hollows devouring hollows, the birth of Menos Grande, the screams of souls torn from the cycle of reincarnation. But on this night, even the eternal hunger paused. Something had arrived that the desert of white quartz could not comprehend. Tia Harabel, the Tres Espada, stood atop Las Noches' highest tower, her teal eyes narrowing at the horizon. Her pesquisa, the hollow ability to detect spiritual pressure, returned nothing. Not the faint traces of a concealed reiyatsu, not the signature of a powerful being suppressing their presence. Absolute nothing, yet every instinct she possessed, honed through centuries of survival in this realm of perpetual predation, screamed that something vast had entered Hueco Mundo. The emptiness moved. Hollows fled before it, their masks cracking from proximity to something their primitive consciousness registered as annihilation itself. A Ajukas-class hollow, powerful enough to have consumed thousands of souls, dissolved mid-flight. No wound, no struggle. Simply gone, as if it had never drawn breath across any lifetime. Interesting, Lord Aizen's voice carried across the palace's white expanse. He stood beside Harabel now, though she hadn't sensed his approach, a reminder that even among the Espada, their creator operated on planes beyond their comprehension. His hand rested casually on Kyoka Suigetsu's hilt. "Tell me, Harabel, what do you see?" "Nothing, Lord Aizen. My pesquisa detects no spiritual pressure, yet the hollows scatter like minnows before a shark they cannot see." Aizen's smile was that of a scientist presented with an equation that defied known mathematics. How marvelous! A presence that exists outside Reiyatsu itself. I had theorized such entities might exist in the spaces between worlds, but to encounter one, the emptiness manifested. One moment, the night of Hueco Mundo stretched unbroken. The next, a figure stood upon the dunes. Purple skin, elongated ears, Egyptian-style clothing that suggested royalty from some ancient civilization. Humanoid in shape, but radiating something that made Harabel's hollow instincts recoil. Not spiritual pressure, not killing intent, something fundamentally other. Beerus, god of destruction of Universe 7, surveyed his surroundings with half-lidded eyes that suggested profound boredom. "Whis?" he called out, his voice carrying a lazy irritation. No response came. The angel who typically attended him was absent, left behind in whatever dimensional catastrophe had deposited a deity of erasure into a realm built upon the cycle of souls. "Figures. I destroy one measly planet and suddenly I'm—" He paused, sniffing the air, his feline features twisted in distaste. "What is this place? Everything smells dead, properly dead, not in the appetizing way." A hollow, driven by the mindless hunger that defined its existence, lunged from the sand. It was a huge-class specimen, its mask resembling a horned serpent, easily capable of devouring entire villages in the world of the living. Beerus glanced at it. The hollow ceased to exist, not destroyed. Not killed. It didn't explode or disintegrate or leave behind residual reiyatsu. The space it had occupied simply no longer contained a hollow, as if the universe had been edited and that creature's entire existence, past, present, and any potential future, had been backspaced from reality's manuscript. "Annoying," Beerus muttered, examining his fingernail with the disinterest of someone who had just swatted a mosquito. In Las Nox, Aizen's eyes widened fractionally, the closest he'd come to expressing surprise since mastering the Hogyoku. "Harabel, summon Alquiora and Stark. Immediately, and prepare the hospitality chambers." "Lord Aizen, we have a guest." His smile deepened. taking on the quality of a maestro who just heard a note no human instrument should produce. One who may prove invaluable to my ascension, or, the smile flickered, one who may require a very different approach than force. Beeru yawned, stretching with feline languor. The motion was casual, thoughtless. The resulting pressure, not spiritual, but the simple physical displacement of air around a being whose existence warped space-time, flattened several dunes and sent a shockwave across 30 miles of desert. "I'm hungry," the destroyer god announced to the empty night. "This place better have food. If I came all this way and there's nothing to eat, I'm going to be very annoyed." In the far distance, the towers of Las Noches gleamed white against the black sky. Beerus's ears perked up. "Oh? Architecture. That usually means civilization, and civilization means food." His expression brightened marginally. Maybe this won't be a complete waste after all. He began walking, each step covering miles, space itself compressing to accommodate his bored impatience. Behind him, the desert had been fundamentally altered. Not scarred or damaged. Altered. The quartz sand where he'd stood no longer reflected spiritual pressure the way Hueco Mundo's matter should. It had been touched by something that existed orthogonal to the Soul Society's laws, and it would never quite fit back into the cycle properly. In the royal realm, suspended above all three worlds, Ichibe Hayosube, commander of the royal guard and the monk who named all things, suddenly opened his eyes. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000,000 years. "Something has entered the realms that possesses no name in the Soul King's language, no designation in the cosmic order." His hand trembled, the first time in recorded history. It exists outside the cycle entirely. Below in Soul Society, the divisions of the Gotei 13 continued their duties, unaware that the fundamental assumptions underlying their universe, that all things possessed Reiyatsu, that death was transformation rather than ending, that the balance of souls was the supreme law, had just been challenged by a bored deity looking for a decent meal. If you want to see more characters collide with anime universes like Bleach, subscribe and comment the character and universe you want next. Beeru reached Las Noches' outer walls. He didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He simply stood there, radiating the patient expectation of someone accustomed to doors opening before him. Inside, Aizen Sosuke prepared to meet something his genius had never anticipated. A being that transcendence could not touch, because it had never needed to transcend anything. The game, Aizen realized with genuine excitement, had just become interesting again. Aizen's fascination. The doors of Las Noches opened without sound, revealing a throne room that stretched toward infinity. Architectural impossibility made manifest through spiritual pressure shaped into matter. Aizen Sosuke sat upon his throne, flanked by his espada. Stark, lounging with calculated disinterest, Ulquiorra standing motionless as a statue, Harabel observing with warrior's caution, and the others arranged in descending numerical order. Beeru entered, and for the first time in his existence as a transcendent being, Aizen felt something he'd almost forgotten. Uncertainty. The purple-skinned figure walked past Yami, the Cerro Espada, whose spiritual pressure in release form could devastate landscapes without a glance. The massive Arrancar might as well have been furniture. When Beerus's gaze swept the assembled Espada, several flinched, not from spiritual pressure, from the instinctive recognition that they were hollow, empty by nature, and this being was emptiness of an entirely different order. "You're the one in charge?" Beeru asked, fixing his half-lidded eyes on Aizen. "I am Aizen Sosuke, architect of this realm's evolution." Aizen rose, his movements precise and controlled. Every gesture was calculated. "Welcome to Las Noches, traveler. Might I inquire as to your name and purpose? Beerus, god of destruction. He said it the way someone might mention being a shopkeeper. As for purpose, I don't have one right now. I was destroying a planet. There was some kind of dimensional tear, and now I'm here in this depressing desert full of dead things. His nose wrinkled. Everything smells wrong, like corpses that forgot to finish rotting. Your observations are astute, Eisen replied smoothly, though internally his mind raced. God of Destruction, the title itself was almost laughable. The Espada destroyed. Captains destroyed, but the casual certainty with which this being claimed divinity, combined with the complete absence of detectable Reiatsu, the residents of Hueco Mundo are hollows, souls who fell into despair and consumed their own hearts, then consumed others to fill the void. They are, as you note, dead things that persist through hunger. Sounds exhausting. Beerus yawned. Are you dead too? The question was so blunt, so devoid of the psychological warfare Eisen had mastered, that it almost made him laugh. I transcended death. I exist beyond the limitations of soul reapers and hollows, both. Beerus seemed profoundly unimpressed. So you're alive then? Good. That means you probably have food. Eisen blinked. Of all the responses he'd anticipated, fear, aggression, curiosity about his power, he had not expected this. Food. Yes, food, the thing you eat. Beerus's expression shifted from bored to mildly annoyed. I've been walking through that desert for what feels like hours, and I'm hungry. If you're in charge of this place, you must have something. Please tell me you have something better than whatever those mask-wearing creatures were. Stark, the Primera Espada, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Ulquiorra's expression remained unchanged, but his green eyes fixed on Beerus with an intensity that suggested his analytical mind had encountered a critical error. Eisen's smile never wavered, but behind it, his genius pivoted. This was not a being to be recruited through promises of power or ideology. This was something far more dangerous and far more simple, a creature of whim and appetite. Of course, Harabel, have the servants prepare a feast. Our guest has traveled far. Lord Eisen. Ulquiorra's monotone carried a note of something almost like concern. This entity. My pesquisa cannot. I'm aware, Ulquiorra. Eisen's voice silenced the Quattro Espada. That is precisely why we will extend every courtesy. Beerus had already wandered toward the throne, examining it with the interest of someone browsing furniture. Bit ostentatious, isn't it? Big empty palace, dramatic lighting, servants who look like they want to kill each other. He glanced back at the Espada. They do want to kill each other, right? I can sense that much. The murder in the air is thick enough to taste. The Espada are arranged by strength, Eisen explained, gesturing for Beerus to follow as he descended from the dais. It creates productive tension. Sounds like a management problem. Beerus followed, hands clasped behind his back. In my universe, I just destroy planets that annoy me. Much simpler. You destroy planets. Eisen repeated it not as a question, but as a data to be filed away. Habitually? It's my job. I'm a god of destruction. I destroy things to maintain cosmic balance. Too many civilizations, too much stagnant energy. The universe gets cluttered. So I clear space. He said it with the casualness of someone describing gardening. Though honestly, it's mostly just when I'm in a bad mood or the food is terrible. I destroyed a planet last week because their pudding was too sweet. Behind them, Noitra, the Quinto Espada, whispered to Grimjow, "This guy's insane." "Shut up," Grimjow hissed back. "Can't you feel it? Something's wrong with him. He's not hollow. He's not alive. He's not anything." Stark, whose spiritual pressure dwarfed the others, watched Beerus with the resigned wariness of a wolf recognizing something higher on the food chain. He's not kidding about the planet thing. I don't know how I know, but I know. He could erase everything here without trying. They arrived at a dining hall where Arrancar's servants, former hollows modified into humanoid servitude, had hastily arranged what passed for cuisine in Hueco Mundo. Primarily spiritual matter shaped to resemble food, supplemented by supplies raided from the world of the living. Beeru surveyed the table, and his expression shifted to one of deep disappointment. This is it? Hueco Mundo's resources are admittedly limited, Aizen acknowledged. However, it looks like hospital food mixed with sand. Beeru picked up what was meant to be a roasted fowl. It dissolved partially in his grip, its spiritual cohesion unable to maintain structure when touched by something outside the Reiatsu framework. And it's not even real. This is just energy shaped to look like food. Everything in Hueco Mundo is formed from spiritual pressure, Aizen explained. Solid matter from your world doesn't naturally exist. Then why am I here? Beeru dropped the pseudo-food back onto the plate. If this realm doesn't have actual food, what's the point? Aizen's mind worked at light speed. This being could erase Las Noches, possibly all of Hueco Mundo, possibly more, and it was irritated about catering. The world of the living, the human realm, possesses actual physical matter. Real food. I can arrange for supplies to be procured immediately. Beerus's ears perked up. Human realm? Like Earth? Similar in composition, yes. Souls originate there, live and die, then pass to Soul Society, or fall to Hueco Mundo. So there's a version of Earth here. Beerus's mood brightened slightly. With actual food? Earth food? Yes. Fine, get me some. I'll wait. Beeru pulled out a chair, which creaked under pressure that had nothing to do with weight and everything to do with localized spatial distortion. And while you're at it, explain this whole death cycle thing. I'm confused. In my universe, when things die, they're dead. Here everything seems to keep existing in some annoying afterlife bureaucracy. Aizen sat across from him, and Olquiora materialized silently beside the table, ever the dutiful observer. The cycle of souls is fundamental to this cosmology. Humans die, and their souls pass to Soul Society, the afterlife realm. Those who succumb to despair before passing become hollows. Hollows consume souls to fill their emptiness. Soul Reapers maintain the balance by purifying hollows, returning them to the cycle. The Soul King oversees it all. Sounds complicated. Beerus rested his chin on his hand. What if something just ends? Completely. No soul, no afterlife. Just gone. The question hung in the air like a blade. Aizen leaned forward fractionally. In this cosmology, true ending is theoretically impossible. All things possess Reiatsu, spiritual pressure. Even when a soul is purified or consumed, its essential energy returns to the cycle. The balance must be maintained. Beerus's eyes gleamed with something that might have been interest. What if I told you I can make things end? Actually end. No energy, no soul, no cycle. Just nothing. I would say, Aizen replied carefully, that such an ability would be the ultimate power, beyond transcendence, beyond the Hogyoku, the power to escape the cycle itself. He paused. I would very much like to see a demonstration. Would you now? Beerus smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Careful what you wish for, Aizen. I've destroyed gods. Before. Usually by accident. The Gote's blindness. In Soul Society, the Seirai Te, the fortified court where the Gote 13's captains governed the afterlife, experienced its first crisis of the day, an emergency captains meeting called without clear cause. Captain Commander Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni stood at the head of the assembly hall, his scarred face grave. The oldest and most powerful Soul Reaper in existence, he had witnessed the rise and fall of countless threats. Yet the report before him defied categorization. "Explain again." Yamamoto's voice carried the weight of millennia. Slowly, Captain Mayuri Kurotsuchi of the 12th Division adjusted his golden headdress with theatrical irritation. "As I've stated twice already, the Department of Research and Development detected a spatial anomaly approximately 4 hours ago. Not a garganta, the dimensional tiers hollows use. Something else. The Reiyatsu readings were—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Inverted." "Inverted?" Captain Shunsui Kyoraku of the 8th Division asked, from where he lounged against a pillar, his straw hat tilted forward. "That's a new one, even for you, Mayuri." "The readings suggested presence without signature, existence without spiritual pressure, a void that possessed dimensionality." Mayuri's painted face twisted in frustration. "It's conceptually absurd, like detecting darkness that generates light." "Perhaps your equipment malfunctioned," Captain Byakuya Kuchiki suggested coolly, his noble bearing rigid with aristocratic skepticism. "My equipment does not malfunction." Mayuri's voice rose several octaves. "The fact that you even suggest—" "Enough!" Yamamoto's words silenced the chamber. "Where did this anomaly originate?" "Hueco Mundo, near Las Noches." Mayuri's expression soured further. "Aizen's territory." The name hung heavy. Aizen Sosuke, former captain of the 5th Division, orchestrator of the greatest betrayal in Soul Society's history, architect of an army of Arrancar designed to overthrow the Soul King himself. Even months after his reveal, the wound was fresh. Could this be Aizen's doing? Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya, youngest of the captains, asked with the intensity of someone who'd been personally betrayed. Another one of his experiments? Unlikely, Mayuri admitted grudgingly. The phenomenon predates Aizen's known research into dimensional manipulation, and the energy signature, or lack thereof, doesn't match Hollow, Soul Reaper, Quincy, or Fullbringer classifications. He paused. It doesn't match anything in our taxonomies. Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th Division spoke for the first time, her gentle voice somehow more unsettling than Yamamoto's authority. "Have there been casualties?" "None reported in Soul Society. However," Mayuri pulled out a tablet-like device covered in strange runes. "Surveillance Kido detected mass hollow disappearances in Hueco Mundo's outer regions. Dozens, possibly hundreds, simply gone." "Aizen eliminating. Weaklings," Byakuya suggested. "The pattern is wrong. Aizen's eliminations leave Reiyatsu traces. These—" Mayuri shook his head. "It's as if the hollows were edited from existence. No residual energy, no soul cycle completion, nothing." The implications settled over the assembly like frost. "That is impossible," Yamamoto stated flatly. "All things return to the cycle. It is the fundamental law of our cosmology." "Tell that to my instruments, old man." Yamamoto's spiritual pressure spiked, a wave of heat that made the air shimmer. Even in this age of peace, he could incinerate Soul Society itself if unleashed. "Choose your next words carefully, Kurotsuchi." Before Mayuri could respond, Lieutenant Chojiro Sasakibe, Yamamoto's aide for 1,000 years, burst through the doors, his composure shattered. "Captain Commander, the Royal Guard has sent an emergency message." Every captain straightened. The Royal Guard, the 0 Division, protected the Soul King himself. They intervened in Sairai Tai affairs, perhaps once per century. "Read it," Yamamoto commanded. Sasakibe's hands trembled as he unrolled the scroll, which glowed with light no terrestrial spiritual pressure could produce. "By order of Ichibe Hayosube, Commander of the Royal Guard. An entity of unknown origin has breached the 3 realms. It possesses no true name and exists outside the Soul King's design. Classification, threat level absolute. All Gotei 13 divisions are to exercise extreme caution. Do not engage. Do not attempt communication. Observation only until Royal Guard assessment is complete. Silence. They don't know what it is, Shunsui said quietly. His usual playfulness evaporated. The Zero Division, who named everything in existence, don't know what this is. Where is the entity now? Yamamoto asked. The scroll indicates. Sasaki-Bey consulted the glowing text. Las noches? With Aizen? Of course it is, Hitsugaya muttered. Yamamoto stood, his haori settling around his shoulders like the weight of duty itself. Kurotsuchi, direct all surveillance to Hueco Mundo. I want constant monitoring. Already in progress, Mayuri replied. Though I should note, conventional observation Kido is having difficulty maintaining lock. The entity's presence seems to reject being perceived. Then use unconventional methods. Adapt. That is your specialty, is it not? Yamamoto turned to address the full assembly. Until the Royal Guard provides further instruction, we operate under the assumption that Aizen has gained access to something beyond our understanding. All divisions increase to war readiness status. Captains are authorized to release Bankai without restriction if Soul Society is threatened. You believe this entity is that dangerous? Byakuya asked. I believe, Yamamoto said slowly, that when the beings who created the concept of names cannot identify something, we must prepare for the unthinkable. His ancient eyes swept the assembly. Dismissed, and pray too, the So King that whatever Aizen has found, he cannot control it. The captains filed out, each contemplating the implications. In the hallway, Shunsui caught up with Unohana, falling into step beside the graceful captain whose reputation as the greatest healer concealed a darker history. You're too quiet, Retsu, Shunsui observed. That usually means you're thinking something unpleasant. Unohana's smile was serene and terrible. I'm thinking that an entity without spiritual pressure cannot be cut by Zanpakuto, cannot be crushed by Reiatsu, cannot be bound by Kido. All our powers are predicated on spiritual energy interacting with spiritual energy. So if it's hostile, then we are fighting something we cannot touch, cannot perceive, and cannot kill. Her voice remained gentle. And if the old man unleashes his flames, if he sets the sky itself ablaze, it may not even notice. Shunsui adjusted his hat lower over his eyes. You're right. That is unpleasant. In the 12th Division's research facility, Mayuri watched his screens with manic intensity. His instruments, pushed to their limits, had managed to catch fragmentary glimpses of Las Noches' interior. What he saw made his scientific mind rebel. Aizen sat at a table. Across from him, a purple-skinned humanoid in Egyptian garb. Between them, hastily arranged plates of food being delivered through Garganta portals, supplies raided from the world of the living. The being, Mayuri had started calling it subject null in his notes, appeared to be eating and complaining. The sushi is mediocre at best. Beerus's voice carried through the surveillance feed. And what is this supposed to be? The fish is too fresh. No, wait, that doesn't make sense. Can fish be too fresh? Aizen's response was measured, almost amused. Might I suggest the... And another thing, Beerus interrupted, picking up a cup of tea and sniffing it suspiciously. This whole death cycle you've got going, it's inefficient. In my universe, death is simple. You die, you're dead. Done. Maybe you get an afterlife if you are strong or interesting, but it's not this whole bureaucratic mess with soul reapers and hollows and balance maintenance. Mayuri zoomed the surveillance closer, desperate for data. As he did, Subject Null glanced directly at the hidden Kido sensor, directly at the camera, and smiled. The surveillance equipment exploded, not from spiritual pressure. It simply ceased functioning, as if the act of observing this being too closely violated some fundamental rule. Mayuri sat back, his painted face slack with something he rarely experienced, genuine fear. "Captain," his Lieutenant Nemu asked, concern in her artificial voice. "Are you well?" "Do you know what's terrifying, Nemu?" Mayuri whispered. "It's not that we can't understand Subject Null. It's that I don't think it considers us important enough to hide from. It looked at my surveillance the way you might glance at an insect, aware, unconcerned, fundamentally unimpressed." He pulled out a communication device. "I need to speak with the Captain Commander immediately. Subject Null isn't a threat like Aizen. Aizen wants to rule. Aizen has ambitions and plans." Mayuri's hands were shaking. "This thing? I think it's just bored. And a bored god is the most dangerous thing in any universe. A feast in las noches." The situation had evolved from crisis to farce in the span of 3 hours. Beeru sat surrounded by what amounted to the entire raided food supply of 12 major Japanese cities. Arrancar warriors, beings who could level mountains, had been reduced to delivery personnel, hauling increasingly exotic dishes through Garganta portals on Aizen's orders. The table stretched 100 feet, groaning under delicacies from kaiseki cuisine to street vendor takoyaki, and Beerus remained unsatisfied. "The tempura's too oily," he declared, setting down a perfectly golden piece of shrimp, "and the rice has an aftertaste. What is that? Spiritual energy. I can taste the spiritual energy in the rice. Why is there spiritual energy in the rice?" "The food is procured from the world of the living," Ulquiorra explained with his characteristic monotone. He'd been assigned as primary server, standing beside Beerus like a waiter at an interdimensional restaurant. However, prolonged exposure to Reiyatsu during transport may affect... That's your problem right there. Beerus pointed a clawed finger at the Quattro Espada. Everything in this universe is contaminated with death energy. Even the food. It's depressing. Aizen watched from across the table, his mind simultaneously engaged in conversation and running thousands of calculations. This being, this Beerus, represented something he'd theorized but never expected to encounter, a variable completely outside the equation. Every experiment Aizen had conducted, every evolution he'd guided, every step toward transcendence had operated within the framework of the Soul King's cosmology. Beerus existed outside that framework entirely. "Perhaps," Aizen ventured, "you might explain more about your role as a god of destruction. I find the concept fascinating. In our cosmology, destruction is typically viewed as evil, the purview of hollows and those who disrupt balance. That's because you don't understand balance." Beerus picked up what appeared to be Wagyu beef, examined it critically, then took a bite. His expression suggested marginal approval. "Real balance isn't about maintaining status quo. It's about clearing away the old to make room for the new. In my universe, I destroy planets, stars, entire civilizations. Not because I'm evil, because the universe needs space to grow. Stagnation is worse than destruction." "A philosophy I find sympathetic," Aizen replied. "Soul society has stagnated for millennia. The same noble families holding power, the same systems perpetuating inequality, the same cycle endlessly repeating." "Then why haven't you destroyed it?" Beerus asked bluntly. The question caught Aizen mid-thought. Destruction without purpose is chaos. I seek to evolve beyond the system, to transcend the Soul King's authority and create something better. Sounds like a lot of work. Beerus yawned. I just destroy things. Much simpler. Stark, observing from the shadows, whispered to Lilinet, his other half, appearing as a young girl with his fraction tattoo. Is it just me, or is Aizen actually losing this conversation? He's definitely losing, Lilinet confirmed. That cat god thing doesn't care about any of his philosophy. He just wants better food. Grimjow, unable to contain himself any longer, stepped forward. The Sexta Espada radiated aggression like heat shimmer. "Oi, Catface, you keep complaining about everything, but you haven't fought anyone yet. How about you show us what a so-called god can actually do?" The room froze. Beerus stopped chewing. His half-lidded eyes shifted to Grimjow with the lazy attention of a predator noticing movement. "Did you just call me Catface?" "Yeah. Problem?" Grimjow's grin was feral. "All this talk about destroying planets and being a god. Prove it. Fight me." "Grimjow." Aizen's voice carried a note of warning that made several Espada flinch. "Stand down." "Why? You want to see what he can do too, don't you?" Grimjow's hand moved to his Zanpakuto. "I'm bored. He's bored. Let's make this interesting." Beerus set down his chopsticks with deliberate care. "You're bored?" "Yeah. And you think fighting me will alleviate that boredom?" "Damn right." Beerus stood. The motion was casual, unhurried, but the air in Las Noches changed. Not spiritual pressure. The Espada would have recognized that. This was something else. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath. "You have no idea what boredom is," Beerus said quietly. "I've lived for millions of your years. I've destroyed more civilizations than you have memories. I've watched galaxies collapse and universes fold. And you, a hollow who barely remembers being human, think you understand boredom?" Grimjow's grin faltered. "But you know what?" Beerus's expression shifted to something almost interested. "You've got guts. Stupid guts, but guts. Fine. Show me what you've got. But if I'm not entertained, I'm erasing this entire palace." "Grimjow, I must insist," Aizen began. "Let him," Beerus interrupted. "If he wants to challenge a god of destruction, who am I to deny him? It's been at least a month since I've had any exercise." He gestured to the open space of the throne room. "Come on then. Try not to bore me." Grimjow's grin returned, wild and dangerous. His hand gripped Pantera, his Zanpakuto. "Finally, something interesting." He raised the blade. "Grind, Pantera." The release of spiritual pressure was immense. Grimjow's form shifted, white armor coating his body, feline features emerging, claws extending. In his resurrection state, he possessed power equivalent to a captain-level Soul Reaper. His speed was hypersonic. His Desgaron, a technique that shredded space itself, could kill most opponents before they perceived the attack. He vanished, using Sonido to move faster than sound, appearing behind Beerus with claws raised to strike. Beerus yawned. The claws stopped inches from his neck, completely unable to advance. Not blocked by defense, not countered by superior speed. Simply stopped, as if Grimjow's attack had reached the edge of what was physically possible and could progress no further. "That's it?" Beerus asked. "That's your full power?" Grimjow's eyes widened. He pushed harder, spiritual pressure flaring. The force should have vaporized a building. Beerus's neck didn't have a scratch. "Interesting. You're fast. Strong, too, for whatever category you fall into." Beerus turned around, moving casually despite Grimjow's claws still hovering near his previous position. "But you're not even close to being able to harm me." "Grans Pantera!" Grimjow roared, unleashing a Kero, a concentrated blast of spiritual energy, at point-blank range. The crimson beam engulfed Beerus completely. The energy was enough to level several city blocks. It tore through Las Noches' wall, creating a massive hole that opened to Hueco Mundo's eternal night. When the light faded, Beerus stood unchanged. Not singed, not bruised. His clothing didn't have dust on it. "My turn," Beerus said simply. He flicked Grimjow's forehead. The Sexta Espada shot backward at speeds that defied comprehension, creating a sonic boom that shattered every window in the palace. He cratered into the far wall, through it actually, continuing through 6 more walls before finally stopping somewhere in Las Noches' distant western wing. Silence. Beerus walked back to the table and sat down. As I was saying, the beef is acceptable but could use better seasoning. Do you have wasabi? Real wasabi, not that green horseradish paste. Ulquiorra stared at the destruction, then at Beerus, then back at the destruction. His analytical mind, capable of perfectly assessing an opponent's capabilities, simply could not process what had occurred. Grimjow's Hierro should have provided some defense. His resurrection should have generated enough spiritual pressure to at least register as resistance. The god of destruction had treated a released espada like a particularly annoying fly. "I'll procure wasabi immediately," Ulquiorra said, his monotone hiding existential crisis. Aizen's smile had frozen on his face. He'd witnessed Grimjow's defeat in less time than it took to breathe. No technique, no special ability, just casual physical superiority so absolute it mocked the entire power structure of their reality. "You barely moved," Aizen observed, keeping his voice level, "because he barely warranted movement." Beerus resumed eating. "If I'd used actual power, your friend would be gone. Completely. No body to recover, no soul to cycle, just deleted. Is that what you wanted to see?" I confess my curiosity is piqued. Aizen leaned forward. "This Hakai you mentioned earlier, the ability to erase things entirely, how does it function?" "I concentrate destructive energy and unmake whatever I target." Beerus said it like he was explaining how to boil water. "It's not complicated. I'm a destroyer god. Destroying things is literally what I am. Would you be willing to demonstrate? On a smaller scale?" Beerus considered this, then shrugged. "Sure. Why not? Pick something you don't need." Aizen gestured, and an Arankar servant brought forward a small hollow, a minor Menos captured for experiments. The creature writhed in its bonds, mask chattering mindlessly. "This specimen is scheduled for vivisection," Aizen explained. "Will it suffice?" "Works for me." Beerus extended one finger casually. Purple energy gathered at the tip, not spiritual pressure, something else, something that made the air itself recoil. "Hakai." The hollow ceased to exist. Ulquiorra's eyes widened fractionally, his only display of emotion. The hollow hadn't been destroyed in any conventional sense. It hadn't exploded or disintegrated. It was simply gone. And more terrifying, his pesquisa, which should still detect the residual reiyatsu of a destroyed hollow, detected nothing. Not even the void a destroyed soul should leave. "It's completely erased," Aizen breathed, and for the first time since achieving transcendence through the Hogyoku, his voice carried genuine awe. No trace in the soul cycle, no reiyatsu signature, as if it never existed. "That's what I've been trying to tell you," Beerus said patiently. "In my universe, when I destroy something, it's gone. Your universe's rules about souls and cycles and balance don't mean anything to me. I exist outside them." Aizen sat back, his mind racing through implications. An ability to permanently erase souls, to truly kill in a cosmology where death was merely transformation. The strategic applications were staggering. With such power, he could eliminate the Soul King without risking the collapse of reality, could remove Yamamoto without leaving a spiritual pressure echo, could win without fighting. But how to acquire such power? How to convince this being, who clearly operated on whim and appetite, to serve his goals? "Lord Aizen," Ulquiorra spoke quietly. "Grimjow is unconscious but alive. His high-speed regeneration is functioning, though slowly. Good." Aizen didn't look away from Beerus. "Tell me, honored guest, what would it take for you to assist me in my goals? I seek to overthrow the Soul King and restructure reality itself. Surely such ambition must interest you." Beerus took a sip of tea, made a face, and set it down. Not really. Your goals sound like work. A lot of work. Planning, fighting, political manipulation. He shuddered. That's the opposite of what I want to do. What do you want to do? Eat good food. Sleep. Occasionally destroy things that annoy me. Beerus stretched. Speaking of which, how much longer until you get me something truly delicious? Everything so far has been mediocre at best. Aizen's eye twitched, a microscopic tell that Alquiora noted with alarm. The architect of transcendence was frustrated. I can offer you the finest cuisine from across all of Soul Society, Aizen said carefully. Foods prepared by masters who've perfected their craft over centuries, and in return, no deals, Beerus interrupted. I don't do deals. If I want something, I take it or destroy what's in my way. If I don't want something, you can't make me. His cat-like eyes narrowed. Are you trying to manipulate me? I merely seek mutually beneficial. That's a yes. Beerus stood abruptly. I don't like being manipulated. In my universe, there's an angel named Whis who handles that sort of thing for me, and even he knows better than to be obvious about it. He turned toward the hole Grimjow had made. I think I'll explore this place on my own. Maybe I'll find something interesting. Wait, Aizen rose, his composure cracking slightly. This couldn't happen. He couldn't lose control of this variable. At least allow me to provide a guide. Las Noches is vast and... Beerus ignored him, walking toward the opening. He paused at the threshold, looking back with an expression of mild pity. Here's some free advice, Aizen. You're smart, really smart, but you're trying to play games with someone who doesn't care about the game. That's your first mistake. He stepped into Hueco Mundo's night. Your second mistake will be thinking you can stop me if I get annoyed enough to destroy everything here. And then he was gone, moving too fast to track, leaving behind a throne room full of Arankar who'd just witnessed their master, the being who'd evolved beyond Soul Reapers and Hollows, outmaneuvered by someone who just wanted better sushi. Stark let out a low whistle. Well, that happened. Aizen stood motionless, his mind already adapting. If direct recruitment failed, other approaches existed. Observation, learning, understanding this being's power well enough to replicate it through the Hogyoku. Nothing was beyond his genius, given time. But for the first time since betraying Soul Society, Aizen Sosuke felt something uncomfortable. The sense that perhaps, just perhaps, he'd encountered something his intelligence alone couldn't overcome. Hakai's first judgment, Beerus, floated above Hueco Mundo's white desert, suspended through casual negation of physics rather than any technique resembling spiritual levitation. Below, the endless expanse of quartz stretched toward horizons perpetually shrouded in darkness. The realm offended him on a fundamental level. Everything here was dead, but refused to finish dying. Depressing, he muttered, scanning for anything of interest. His divine senses, unrelated to the spiritual pressure detection this universe relied upon, perceived Hueco Mundo's true nature, a realm constructed from accumulated despair, populated by souls so consumed by emptiness they'd become emptiness itself. A hollow emerged from the sand, a Jushas class, its mask resembling a stag's skull with too many antlers. It had likely existed for centuries, devouring thousands to maintain its form and avoid regression. It sensed something, though not through pesquisa, some primal instinct that registered Beerus as threat or prey. It chose poorly. The hollow lunged, firing a sarrow from its maw. The crimson beam would have atomized a building. Beerus caught it with one hand. The destructive energy dissipated against his palm like water against stone. Annoying, Beerus observed. The hollow, realizing its error, attempted to flee. Hakai. The Adjutus vanished mid-flight. No explosion, no residual energy. One moment it existed, the next it simply didn't. The space it had occupied contained nothing, not even the void a destroyed hollow should leave in the Reiatsu field. Beeru continued his flight, and as he moved, more hollows emerged. Drawn by instinct or hunger, or the maddening emptiness of their existence, they attacked. A dozen, then 50, then hundreds, rising from the sand in a swarm that blotted out the black sky. "You're all very annoying," Beeru said with the patience of someone swatting mosquitoes. He raised both hands. Purple energy, destructive force refined to its purest expression, gathered around him. Hakai! The wave expanded outward in a sphere of erasure. Every hollow within a 5-mile radius ceased to exist. Not killed, not destroyed, deleted. The Reiatsu field of Hueco Mundo itself buckled, unable to comprehend space suddenly emptied of the spiritual matter that had occupied it for centuries. The sand where hollows had stood remained pristine, as if they'd never walked upon it. In Las Noches, Aizen's surveillance equipment screamed warnings. On screens, vast sections of Hueco Mundo simply went dark, not destroyed, but emptied in ways that violated everything they understood about spiritual existence. "He's erasing them," Ulquiorra reported, his monotone carrying subliminal horror. "Hundreds, perhaps thousands, no residual Reiatsu, no souls returning to the cycle. They're simply gone." Aizen watched, calculating. This was beyond power. This was conceptual authority over existence itself. The Hogyoku granted evolution, transformation, transcendence, but even the Hogyoku operated within the Soul King's framework. It couldn't simply delete things from reality. "Fascinating," Aizen murmured, "and terrifying." "Lord Aizen," Ulquiorra turned from the screens. "If he continues at this rate, he could erase Hueco Mundo entirely within days. Possibly hours if he chooses efficiency over wandering." "I'm aware." Aizen's hand moved to where the Hogyoku rested within his chest, its power thrumming in response to his will. Could it evolve him to match this deity's capability? Grant him the same authority over existence and non-existence? Or would attempting to contain such power destroy him? High above, in the royal realm that existed outside normal space-time, Ichibe Hyosube convened with the other 4 members of the royal guard. "The entity has begun erasure," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of eons. "Hundreds of hollows removed from existence entirely." Kirio Hikifun, the corpulent woman who'd created artificial souls, frowned deeply. "Removed from the cycle. Beyond the cycle, they no longer exist in any sense. Their past, their spiritual matter, their very names have been deleted." Ichibe's ancient face was grave. "I am the monk who names all things. I gave hollows their designation. I wove their concept into the Soul King's language, and this being is erasing them so completely that even I cannot recall what they were before deletion." Uetsu Nemaya, the sword god who'd forged every Zanpakuto in existence, let out a low whistle. "That's a problem. A big problem. If it can erase hollows, it can erase Shinigami. Can it erase Zanpakuto?" "I suspect it could erase anything in any of the 3 realms," Ichibe replied. "The question becomes, can we stop it?" Silence answered him. Tenjiro Kirinji, master of healing hot springs, spoke carefully. "Our power derives from the Soul King's authority. We're the strongest beings in his design, but if this entity exists outside that design, then we may be fundamentally unable to oppose it." Senjumaru Shutara finished, her multiple arms gesturing with unusual agitation. "It would be like trying to cut water with spiritual blades. The framework doesn't apply." Ichibe nodded slowly. "Precisely. which means our approach must be diplomatic or we pray it loses interest and leaves. Kirio said quietly, because if it decides to destroy the Soul King himself, we may not be able to prevent it. The Royal Guard, beings who'd existed since before Soul Society's founding, who'd served the Soul King for millennia, contemplated the unsettling reality that their purpose might be meaningless against a force that didn't acknowledge their existence as significant. Beerus had stopped floating and now stood atop a crystalline formation that rose from Hueco Mundo's desert like frozen lightning. He'd grown bored of erasing hollows. They kept attacking, kept dying, kept being pointlessly suicidal. It was like swatting an infinite supply of flies. There has to be something interesting in this universe, he complained to the empty night. That Eisen fellow was smart but annoying. The blue-haired one had spirit but no actual power. These masked creatures are just sad. His divine senses expanded, perceiving the structure of this reality. 3 realms, the world of the living, filled with actual physical matter and potentially decent food. Soul Society, a bureaucratic afterlife that sounded tedious, and this depressing, hollow-filled desert. Between them, flows of souls moving through the cycle, maintaining cosmic balance. Balance, Beerus mused. They keep talking about balance like it's sacred, but it's just a complicated system keeping dead things busy. He focused his perception on Soul Society. Thousands of souls. Powerful spiritual pressures. Those must be the Soul Reapers Eisen had mentioned. Interesting. They felt more alive than the Hollows, though still constrained by this universe's strange death energy framework. Beyond Soul Society, something else. A presence so vast it might qualify as the center of this reality. Massive, ancient, barely conscious, radiating power that sustained the 3 realms themselves. Oh? Beerus's interest peaked for the first time since arriving. Now that's more like it. Someone important. Maybe even someone worth fighting. He prepared to fly toward Soul Society when a voice echoed across Hueco Mundo. Not sound, but meaning impressed directly upon consciousness. God of destruction, we would speak with you. Beerus looked up. 5 figures materialized in the air above him, descending through space-time rather than traveling through it. They radiated power on a completely different scale than the Arrancar or even Eisen. Not stronger necessarily, but more fundamental. These beings were woven into the fabric of this reality itself. The Royal Guard had arrived. Ichibe Hyosube stepped forward, his massive form imposing despite Beerus's divine nature. I am Ichibe Hyosube, commander of the Royal Guard, monk who names all things, servant of the Soul King. We come not to fight, but to understand. You're more polite than the last group, Beerus acknowledged. What do you want? To know your purpose here. Your presence disrupts the balance of souls. Your erasure of hollows creates voids in the cycle. If you continue unchecked, the 3 realms may destabilize. Beerus shrugged. Not my problem. I didn't ask to come here. 1 minute I'm destroying a planet in my universe. The next I'm in this depressing death desert, surrounded by things that won't stay dead properly. Nevertheless, your actions have consequences. Wetsu spoke up, his casual demeanor at odds with the gravity of the situation. Every hollow you erase is a soul permanently removed. The balance requires— I don't care about your balance, Beerus interrupted. In my universe, I maintain balance by destroying things, planets, stars, civilizations. When something becomes stagnant or problematic, I erase it. That's balance. What you have here is— He gestured at the expanse of Hueco Mundo. A complicated waste of time. The Soul King's design has maintained existence for millions of years, Ichibe said carefully. Your perspective, while valid in your cosmology, may not apply here. Then your cosmology is flawed. Beerus's eyes narrowed. Tell me something. This Soul King you keep mentioning, is he actually a god? Or just a very powerful administrator? The royal guard exchanged glances. The Soul King is difficult to explain, Tenjiro hedged. He maintains the separation between life and death, prevents the realms from collapsing into primordial chaos. So he's a support pillar, a keystone holding up a broken building. Beerus crossed his arms. Not a god, just a slave to his own system. You dare! Ichibe began, his spiritual pressure flaring. The pressure washed over Beerus like rain over stone. He didn't move, didn't react. The massive outpouring of Reiatsu that could have crushed mountains simply failed to acknowledge his existence as something it could affect. See, that's your problem right there, Beerus said mildly. You think spiritual pressure matters to me, but I'm not part of your spiritual framework. I'm a destroyer god. I exist to end things, your power, your balance, your Soul King. None of it means anything if I decide to destroy it. You threaten the Soul King? Ichibe's voice dropped to dangerous levels. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating facts. Beerus yawned. Look, I didn't come here to destroy your reality. I came here by accident. All I want is decent food and maybe something interesting to do. But everyone keeps trying to recruit me, manipulate me, or test me. It's annoying. Senjumaru stepped forward, her multiple arms weaving patterns in the air. What if we offered you a way home? My weaving can manipulate dimensional fabrics. Perhaps we could locate your universe and create a path. Beerus perked up slightly. You can do that? Given time and proper materials, possibly. The dimensional tear that brought you here left traces. If we analyze them, how long? Days, possibly weeks. Beerus's expression soured. That's too long. I'd die of boredom first. He paused. Or destroy something out of irritation. Probably both. Then what would satisfy you? Kirio asked, her practical nature asserting itself. What would keep you from destroying things while we work? Good food, Beerus said immediately. Actual good food, not the garbage that Eisenfellow tried to feed me. Something worth eating. The royal guard stared at him. That's it? Uitsu asked incredulously. Food? Food, and don't bother me with your politics. Beerus nodded firmly. I don't care about Eisen's rebellion. I don't care about Soul Society's hierarchy. I don't care about your balance or your cycle or your Soul King. Feed me interesting meals and leave me alone, and I probably won't destroy anything important. Probably, Ichibe repeated. I have a temper. Ask anyone who knows me. Well, you can't, because you're in a different universe. But trust me, I have a temper, so keep the food coming and the annoyances minimal, and we'll get along fine. The royal guard convened privately, their consciousness linking for faster deliberation. The conclusion came quickly. This being could not be threatened, could not be manipulated, could barely be reasoned with. But it could be managed, if they treated it like a natural disaster to be navigated rather than an enemy to be defeated. Agreed, Ichibe announced. We will provide you with the finest cuisine we can procure. In return, you will cease erasing hollows and avoid Soul Society until we've found a way to return you home. And if I get bored, we will endeavor to keep you entertained. Beerus considered this, then shrugged. Fine. But if the food is bad, I'm destroying something. Maybe that big palace, maybe this whole desert, maybe all of it. Understand? Perfectly. Good. Beerus sat down on the crystalline formation, legs crossed. I'll wait here. You have 1 hour to bring me something worth eating. Go. The royal guard vanished, teleporting back to their realm with unprecedented speed. Alone again, Beerus looked up at Hueco Mundo's black sky. This universe is so weird, he muttered. Everything's dead, but nothing actually ends. What's the point? He didn't know that his question, that single philosophical challenge to the cycle of souls, would echo through the royal realm, soul society, and even Las Noches. For the first time in millennia, beings who'd accepted the cosmic order as absolute began asking, what if there was another way? What if endings were necessary? What if balance required true destruction, not eternal recycling? Beeru, bored and hungry, had planted a seed of doubt in the very foundations of the Bleach universe's cosmology. And seeds, given time, grow into something that changes everything. Soul Society's panic. The emergency meeting convened within minutes of the Royal Guard's departure from Hueco Mundo. This time, Captain Commander Yamamoto didn't wait for all captains to arrive before beginning. "The Royal Guard has made contact with the entity," he announced without preamble. Shunsui, Unohana, Byakuya, Hitsugaya, and Mayuri stood at attention, with other captains filtering in through Senkaimon portals. Commander Hyosube reports that the being calls itself Beeru, God of Destruction from an alternate universe. God of Destruction? Mayuri's voice dripped skepticism, a rather grandiose title. Commander Hyosube does not use the term lightly. Yamamoto continued, his scarred face grave. The entity possesses an ability it calls Hakai, complete erasure. Not destruction in any sense we understand, but deletion from existence itself. It has already removed approximately 3,000 hollows from Hueco Mundo. Permanently. The assembled captains absorbed this in silence. 3,000 souls, Unohana said softly. Removed from the cycle entirely. That will create an imbalance. The imbalance is already manifesting, Mayuri confirmed, pulling out his tablet. The 12th Division's monitoring equipment has detected fluctuations in the soul current between realms. Small for now, but if the erasures continue. He made a slashing gesture. "What does it want?" Byakuya asked, his aristocratic composure intact despite the implications. Yamamoto's expression suggested he'd bitten into something sour. "Food. The being demands high-quality cuisine in exchange for ceasing its erasure of hollows and avoiding soul society." Stunned silence. "Food," Shunsui repeated, adjusting his hat as if that might help him process the absurdity. A being that can apparently delete souls from existence wants food. The Royal Guard is currently procuring supplies from across Soul Society, Yamamoto confirmed. Every noble house has been ordered to provide their finest stored goods. The entire Gotei 13 is being mobilized to serve as caterers. "This is humiliating," Hitsugaya muttered. "This is survival," Unohana corrected gently. Commander Hyosube assessed that we cannot defeat this entity through force. It exists outside our spiritual framework. Our Zanpakuto cannot cut it. Our Kido cannot bind it. Even the Captain Commander's flames may not affect it. Yamamoto's jaw tightened, but he didn't contradict her. Mayuri was typing frantically on his tablet. "I've been analyzing the data from Hueco Mundo. The erasure pattern suggests the entity uses energy that doesn't interact with Reiyatsu at all. It's as if it reaches past our reality's rules and simply switches things off, like deleting a file rather than burning a document." "Can we replicate such power?" Byakuya asked. "Theoretically. Perhaps, given decades of research and complete understanding of the underlying principles." Mayuri's painted face twisted in frustration. "Practically. We don't even have the vocabulary to describe what it's doing. It's like trying to explain color to someone born blind." "What about Aizen?" Shunsui interjected. "Last report had the entity at Las Noches. Has Aizen recruited it?" "Negative," Yamamoto replied. According to Royal Guard observation, the entity rejected Aizen's overtures completely. It appears uninterested in his rebellion or any faction allegiance. It views our conflicts as... He paused, as if the words pained him. Entertainment. Background noise while it searches for satisfying meals. It doesn't take us seriously, Hitsugaya realized. At all. Why would it? Unohana's serene expression held dark knowledge. Imagine a being so powerful that entire species are insects beneath its notice. We're not threats to be eliminated or allies to be courted. We're simply present, part of the environment it finds itself in. Captain Komamura, the wolf-headed captain of the 7th Division, spoke for the first time, his deep voice troubled. If this entity views us as insignificant, what prevents it from destroying Soul Society if we bore it or offend it somehow? No one had an answer. The Royal Guard is attempting to locate the dimensional tear that brought it here, Yamamoto continued. If successful, they can potentially return it to its universe. Until then, we must keep it satisfied and uninvolved in our affairs. What if Aizen tries to use it? Shunsui asked. He's clever. If he finds some way to manipulate or provoke this Beeru into attacking us, then we face extinction, Mayuri said bluntly. From preliminary analysis, this entity could erase the Seraitai in seconds if motivated. Possibly all of Soul Society, maybe the entire Soul Cycle itself. The Soul King would intervene, Byakuya insisted. His power sustains all 3 realms. Surely, the Soul King is motionless, Unohana interrupted, her voice carrying unusual weight. A living keystone, not an active force. If this entity decided to erase him, I suspect we would discover the truth too late to matter. Yamamoto's spiritual pressure flared briefly, frustration mixing with ancient resolve. We operate under the following restrictions until further notice. No captain is to approach or engage the entity called Beeru under any circumstances. All interactions will be handled by the Royal Guard exclusively. Our priority is maintaining readiness for when Aizen makes his inevitable move against Soul Society. The entity is to be treated as a natural disaster, avoided, not confronted. Sir, Lieutenant Sasakibe entered hastily. The Royal Guard requests immediate delivery of specific food items. He handed over a list. Yamamoto scanned it, his eyebrow rising fractionally. Sushi-grade tuna, wagyu beef, sake aged for at least a century, fruits from the Noble District, pastries from the human world prepared within the last hour. He looked up. They're providing it with a feast. Better than the alternative, Shunsui muttered. Captain Kurotsuchi, Yamamoto turned to the scientist. Continue monitoring. I want to know immediately if the entity moves towards Soul Society or shows any sign of hostility. Already in progress, Mayuri confirmed. Though I should note, my surveillance equipment has a 50% failure rate when observing it directly. The entity seems to reject being perceived, as if reality itself is uncertain whether it should be visible. Do your best. Yamamoto dismissed them with a gesture. Captains, return to your divisions and prepare your troops. If diplomacy fails and the entity attacks, we will defend Soul Society to our last breath. But understand, we may not be enough. The captains dispersed, each contemplating the uncomfortable reality that 1,000 years of tradition, power, and authority had been rendered meaningless by a bored deity who just wanted good food. In the royal realm, a massive kitchen had been commandeered. Kiryo Hikifune, former captain of the 12th Division before ascending to the Royal Guard, master of Soul Society's finest cuisine, worked with manic intensity. The wagyu must be prepared at precisely the right temperature, she instructed a team of servants conscripted from noble houses. Too rare and the fat doesn't render properly. Too cooked and it loses the buttery texture. This being has destroyed planets over bad food. We cannot afford mistakes. Uetsu watched from the doorway, arms crossed. Never thought I'd see the day the Royal Guard became caterers. We're preventing universal collapse through culinary excellence, Kiryo shot back. Show some respect for the profession. Can't we just fight it? Uetsu's casual tone belied the seriousness of the question. We're the Royal Guard. We've got power that makes captains look like academy students. Surely between the 5 of us. No, Ichibe interrupted, entering the kitchen with solemn finality. I've glimpsed the entity's name, or rather, attempted to. My ability to perceive and manipulate names grants me insight into being's essential nature. When I looked at Beeru, he trailed off. What did you see? Senjumaru asked, her multiple hands pausing in their dimensional calculations. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. As if he has no name in any language spoken in this universe. No designation in the Soul King's lexicon. He is fundamentally unnamed. Ichibe's ancient face looked troubled. My power grants authority over all things with names. If a being has no name by our cosmos's definition, I have no authority over it. That's terrifying, Tenjiro said flatly. That's reality. Ichibe watched as Kiryu plated the first dish, perfectly seared tuna over seasoned rice, garnished with ingredients that cost more than most soul reapers earned in a year. We serve a being that our power cannot touch, hoping our service satisfies it enough to leave our realm intact. I've almost isolated the dimensional signature of its entry point, Senjumaru reported. But there's a problem. The fabric of reality where it entered is damaged permanently, as if its mere presence burned a hole that cannot heal through conventional means. Can you send it back? Ichibe asked. Given time and resources, I can create a portal to where it came from, but whether that leads to its actual home universe or just empty void. She made an uncertain gesture with several arms. Unknown. The dimensional mathematics are unlike anything in Soul Society's records. How long? Optimistically? 5 days. Realistically? 2 weeks. Ichibe nodded slowly. Then we keep it fed and entertained for 2 weeks. Kiryu? How confident are you in this meal? The corpulent woman lifted the tray with surprising grace. If this doesn't satisfy it, nothing in Soul Society will. I've combined preparation techniques refined over 5,000 years with ingredients that haven't been this fresh since the Soul King first established the realms. She paused, but I cannot guarantee it will meet the standards of a being from an entirely different universe. It will have to suffice. Ichibe took the tray himself. I will deliver it personally. Uetsu, Tenjiro, remain on standby. If the entity becomes hostile, your combat abilities may buy Soul Society time to evacuate. Evacuate to where? Uetsu asked grimly. If it can erase souls, no realm is safe. Ichibe had no answer for that. In Hueco Mundo, Beeru waited with the patience of someone who'd outlived galaxies. An hour had passed. He was considering whether to destroy something small, just a tower or two from that palace, when space tore open. Ichibe Hayosube emerged, carrying a tray that steamed with aromatic promise. Beerus's nose twitched. Finally, let me see what you've got. The monk presented the meal with ceremonial formality. Seared tuna, wagyu tataki, seasonal vegetables prepared 3 different ways. Rice that had been cultivated in soil, blessed by centuries of spiritual energy, and sak so old it predated most of Soul Society's institutions. Beerus examined it critically, picked up the chopsticks, selected a piece of tuna, ate. His expression shifted from bored expectation to genuine surprise. This is good, he admitted, taking another piece. Actually good. The tuna is perfectly prepared. The rice has that subtle sweetness. The sak is... He took a sip. Acceptable. Strong, but with complex notes. Ichibe allowed himself the tiniest breath of relief. I am pleased it meets your standards. We can provide meals of this caliber for the duration of your stay. How long is my stay going to be? We are working to locate your universe and create a path home, approximately 2 weeks. Beerus frowned around a mouthful of wagyu. 2 weeks of being stuck in this depressing dimension. That's a long time to be bored. We will ensure entertainment as well as sustenance, Ichibe promised. Is there anything specific that interests you? Beeru considered this, while working through the meal with impressive speed. That guy in the palace, Aizen, he mentioned something about overthrowing a Soul King. That sounds potentially interesting. A cosmic rebellion. Maybe I'll watch how it plays out. Ichibe's blood ran cold. The Soul King must not be threatened. His existence maintains... Relax. I said watch, not help. Beeru finished the sake. I'm not getting involved in your politics, but if there's going to be a big fight between that Aizen fellow and your Soul Society, at least it'll be something to do. I see. Ichibe chose his words with extreme care. Might I ask that you refrain from interfering in any conflicts? Your power could inadvertently cause catastrophic imbalance. Sure. I'll stay out of it. Beeru set down the empty dishes. But if anyone attacks me or interrupts my meals, I'm destroying them. Fair warning. Understood completely. Ichibe collected the tray. We will deliver your next meal in 6 hours. Is that acceptable? It'll do. Beeru lay back on the crystalline formation, hands behind his head. Wake me if something interesting happens. Otherwise, leave me alone. Ichibe bowed, a gesture of respect he'd only ever given to the Soul King, and departed through a portal. Alone once more, Beeru stared up at Hueco Mundo's endless night. 2 weeks, he muttered. This is going to be so boring. He didn't know that across 3 realms, his presence had already set events in motion that would shatter the cosmic status quo. Aizen was recalculating his rebellion, searching for ways to leverage or avoid this new variable. Soul Society was paralyzed by fear, unable to confront its greatest traitor while babysitting a god. And in the shadows between realms, something ancient stirred, something that had slumbered since before the Soul King's imprisonment. Beeru had arrived seeking food and entertainment. He was going to get far more than he bargained for. Quincy intervention. The disturbance in the spiritual fabric of reality did not go unnoticed by all. In the shadows between dimensions, in a realm that existed orthogonal to Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the world of the living, a palace of white stone and impossible geometry stirred to awareness. The Vandenreich, the hidden empire of the Quincy. Yuach, the sealed progenitor of all Quincy, opened his eyes within his crystalline prison. Despite his imprisonment, his consciousness extended throughout the Sternritter, his elite warriors who served as extensions of his will. Through their eyes, he perceived the cosmic disruption, a presence that had no place in the Soul King's design. Hashwolf, his voice echoed through the throne room despite his physical stillness. Summon the Sternritter. Something has entered the realms that predates my vision of the future. Dugram Hashwolf, Yuach's right hand and the Sternritter Grandmaster, knelt immediately. His blonde hair caught the ethereal light of the Quincy dimension. Your Majesty sensed it as well, the absence in the spiritual world? It is not an absence. It is a presence so foreign to this cosmology that it registers as void. Yuach's 3 eyes, the mark of his divine sight, focused on futures yet to unfold. But when he looked toward this entity called Beeru, the futures fractured into static. For the first time in millennia, I cannot perceive a clear path. This being exists outside fate itself. Should we eliminate it? Hashwolf asked. No. Yuach's voice carried absolute certainty. We observe. If the Soul King's world contains something outside his design, that weakness can be exploited. When I am freed and the 1,000-year blood war begins, I will need every advantage. This god of destruction may be the variable that ensures our victory. But Your Majesty, if you cannot foresee its actions, then we adapt. The Quincy have survived through adaptation. Yuach smiled behind his sealed form. Send Askin, His ability to manipulate lethal dosages works on concepts as well as poisons. If this entity requires sustenance, Askin can learn its weaknesses. As you command. In another section of the Vandenreich, Askin Nak Levar, Sternritter D, the death-dealing, received his orders with characteristic laziness. The tall Quincy, with white hair and a perpetual expression of mild annoyance, sighed dramatically. Really? His Majesty wants me to poison a god? Askin adjusted his coat. That's such a hassle. Can't someone else do it? Bambietta loves explosions. Send her. Your ability is ideally suited, Hashwalth replied coldly. You manipulate lethal doses. Food is merely controlled poison. Learn what sustains this entity, and you learn how to kill it. Bold of you to assume food can kill a destroyer god. But fine, I'll take a look. Askin's expression shifted to something more calculating beneath the laziness. Though if this thing really can erase souls permanently, I'm not getting close enough to test anything directly. Observation only. Acceptable. Hashwalth handed him a small device that glowed with Quincy Reishi. This will allow you to pierce dimensional barriers undetected. Do not engage. Do not reveal yourself. Simply observe and report. Askin vanished into shadow, using Shatten, the Quincy shadow walking technique, to traverse dimensions. Beerus had just finished his third meal when he felt it. Not spiritual pressure. He'd grown somewhat accustomed to that sensation, even if it didn't affect him. This was different. A presence observing him through layers of reality, trying to remain hidden. His eyes opened. I can sense you, you know. You're not nearly as subtle as you think. In the dimensional shadow, Askin froze. His concealment techniques were perfect. Folded space that should be imperceptible to anyone not specifically trained in Quincy arts. Yet this entity had detected him instantly. Might as well come out, Beerus called, not even bothering to sit up. Lurking in shadows is creepy. Askin considered his options, then stepped out of the shadow realm with a theatrical sigh. You're perceptive. That's annoying. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace. I'm just observing, not here to fight or anything exhausting like that. Beerus studied the newcomer, tall, white-haired, wearing a long coat marked with strange symbols. His energy felt different from the Soul Reapers or Hollows. Sharp, controlled, fundamentally opposed to the death energy that permeated this universe. You're not one of those Soul Reapers, Beerus observed, or the Musk creatures. What are you? Quincy, Askin Nak Levar, Sternritter D. He bowed with exaggerated courtesy. We're sort of the third faction in this mess. Enemies of the Soul Reapers, exterminators of Hollows, generally unpopular with everyone. Sounds exhausting. It really is. Askin sat down uninvited on a nearby rock, maintaining careful distance. But that's politics for you. Anyway, I'm here because my boss is curious about you. A being that exists outside the Soul King's design is interesting to our cause. Your cause being overthrowing the Soul King and reconstructing the world without the cycle of death and rebirth. Askin said it casually, as if discussing the weather. We think the current system is flawed. Too much suffering, too much inequality, too much pointless recycling of souls. Beerus's interest perked up slightly. Another rebellion. How many people in this universe want to overthrow their god? At least 2 major factions that I know of. Eisen wants to replace the Soul King. We want to kill him and rebuild from scratch. Askin pulled out what looked like a silver flask. Different methodologies, same basic goal, cosmic regime change. And you want me to help? Not really. You seem like the type who'd refuse, and then I'd have to fight you, and that sounds exhausting and likely to end with me being erased from existence. Askin took a sip from his flask. No, I'm just here to learn about you. What you eat, what you drink, how your biology works, information gathering. Why? Askin's lazy expression gained an edge. Because information is power. If we know what sustains you, we might understand how your erasure ability works. And if we understand that, he shrugged. Well, knowledge is never wasted. You want to replicate my Hakai? Beerus said it as fact, not accusation. In an ideal world, yes. More realistically, we want to know if it can be defended against or countered. Askin's honesty was almost disarming. Look, I'm not going to pretend we're friends or that our interests align, but you're stuck here for 2 weeks according to what I've overheard. Maybe we can have an arrangement. I bring you interesting foods from across the realms, stuff the Royal Guard doesn't have access to, and you let me study you from a safe distance. What makes you think you have better food? Because the Quincy have been hiding in dimensional shadows for centuries. We've raided the world of the living extensively. Human cuisine from every culture, every era. Askin's smile was genuinely enthusiastic now. I can get you authentic ramen from 1950s Tokyo, pizza from Naples before it became commercialized. Chocolate from Mesoamerica made the original way. The Soul Reapers are stuck with their noble house cuisine and whatever modern food they can grab. We've got centuries of the good stuff archived. Beerus sat up, suddenly more attentive. You have a food archive? Entire warehouses. Preserved through reishi manipulation so nothing ever goes stale. Askin could see he'd found leverage. I'm talking meals from extinct restaurants, recipes from culinary masters who've been dead for centuries, ingredients that no longer exist in the current world of the living. Why would you give me access to that? Because I'm curious, and curiosity is worth the price of admission. Askin stood, dusting off his coat. Plus, if you're going to be stuck here anyway, might as well eat well, right? Better than whatever politically motivated garbage the Royal Guard is feeding you. Beerus considered this. The Quincy's offer was transparently self-serving, but at least it was honest about being self-serving. And the promise of food from across centuries was genuinely appealing. Fine, Beerus decided. But I'm not helping you fight anyone, overthrow anyone, or explain how my powers work. You bring food, I eat it, you observe from a distance. That's it. Perfect. Low commitment, low risk, high culinary reward. Askin bowed again. I'll be back in 3 hours with something special. Try not to erase any more hollows in the meantime. You're making the reishi balance all wonky, and it's giving our dimension monitoring team headaches. He vanished back into shadow before Beerus could respond. Alone again, Beerus lay back down. This universe just keeps getting weirder. Everyone wants to overthrow their god. Nobody's satisfied with their cosmic status quo. It's like a galaxy-sized family drama. He didn't notice the small reishi tracker Askin had left behind. A device so subtle it barely existed, designed to monitor energy signatures and biological responses without being detectable. In the Vandenreich, Hashwolf received Askin's initial report. The entity accepted your offer. Hashwolf's surprise was evident. It's motivated by food and boredom. Simple drives for such a complex being. Askin pulled up holographic data already collected by the tracker. Preliminary readings are strange. It doesn't metabolize food the way any life form we've studied does. The food seems to simply disappear into some kind of dimensional storage, as if its body exists partially in another space. Can you poison it? Unknown. Its biology is so foreign I can't even classify it as biology. It might not have organs in any sense we'd recognize. Askin's expression grew serious. But I'll learn. Give me a week of observation, and I'll know everything about how it functions. His Majesty will be pleased. His Majesty is always planning 10 steps ahead. That's why we follow him. Askin turned to leave, then paused. Though I should mention, when I was in that entity's presence, I felt something I've never felt before. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. As if my Quincy powers, which manipulate lethal doses and death itself, recognized something in it. A kindred concept. Explain. The Quincy destroys souls completely. We don't purify them back into the cycle like soul reapers. We eradicate, in this entity's Hakai. Askin's eyes gleamed with scientific fascination. It's the perfected form of what we do. Absolute erasure without remainder. If we could learn that technique, adapt it to Reishi manipulation, the Soul Reapers would have no defense, Harshwalth finished. Even their Bankai couldn't counter something that bypasses spiritual pressure entirely. Exactly. This entity might be the key to His Majesty's perfect victory. Askin smiled. All I have to do is figure it out before it gets bored and destroys everything. The choice of balance. 3 days had passed. Beeru had sampled cuisine from 4 different eras of human history, destroyed only 2 minor hollows that attacked him despite warnings, and was beginning to appreciate the complexity of the conflict he'd stumbled into. Currently, he sat atop Las Noches, not inside, but literally on the roof, while representatives from all 3 major factions tried to convince him of their righteousness. It had become a philosophical debate, and Beeru was mildly entertained. The Soul King is a tyrant, Aizen argued from his position floating at eye level with the Destroyer God. His Hogyoku pulsed within his chest, granting him flight and power beyond captain class. He created a system that perpetuates suffering. Souls are born, die, and cycle endlessly without choice, without growth, without true transcendence. I seek to free all existence from this prison. His Majesty Yuak offers an alternative, Harshwalth countered, having been sent as the Quincy representative. Not transcendence through evolution, but reconstruction through destruction. Tear down the Soul King's flawed design and build something without the arbitrary separation of life and death. Both of you advocate for cosmic murder. Ichibe Hayosube spoke with the weight of eons. The monk had become Beerus's primary contact with Soul Society. The Soul King sacrificed his own freedom to prevent primordial chaos. Without his stabilizing presence, the 3 realms would collapse into each other. All souls would be annihilated in the resulting chaos. Beeru ate another piece of tempura, this one from 1920s Osaka, perfectly crispy and exactly the right temperature, and listened to them argue. So let me get this straight, he said after swallowing. You, he pointed at Aizen, want to replace your god. You, he gestured to Harshwalth, want to kill your god and rebuild. And you, he looked at Ichibe, want to protect your god, even though he's essentially a prisoner holding up a broken system. Simplistic, but essentially accurate, Aizen acknowledged. And you all want me to pick a side, support someone's cause, tip the cosmic balance in someone's favor. We merely seek to help you understand the implications of your presence here, Ichibe said carefully. Your erasure ability disrupts the soul cycle. Every hollow you delete creates imbalance, if that imbalance grows large enough. The Soul King's system fails faster, Aizen finished, his smile predatory, which serves my purposes admirably. Whether intentionally or not, Lord Beerus, you're accelerating the collapse I've worked centuries to achieve. His Majesty would argue that collapse is inevitable and should be hastened, Harshwalth added. A quick death is more merciful than slow decay. Beerus set down his food with uncharacteristic seriousness. You're all dancing around the real question, so I'll ask it directly. What happens if I erase your Soul King? The 3 representatives froze. The realms would immediately begin collapsing, Ichibe said, his voice strained. Life and death would lose all distinction. The world of the living would be flooded with spiritual matter. Souls would cease to pass properly. Within days, possibly hours, all 3 realms would merge into primordial chaos. Everyone dies, Beerus concluded. Everyone dies, Ichibe confirmed. Unless Aizen interjected smoothly. Someone of sufficient power immediately replaces the Soul King as the linchpin. Someone who has already transcended the limitations of Soul Reapers and Hollows. Someone who possesses the Hogyoku's evolutionary potential. You, Beerus said flatly. Precisely. With Lord Beerus's Hakai removing the Soul King and my transcendent power immediately filling the void, the transition could be managed, controlled. The new order would emerge without the chaos Ichibe fears. Or, Hashwolf countered, His Majesty Yuak could absorb the Soul King's power, as is his birthright. The Quincy King contains the potential to reconstruct reality itself. He is literally made from the Soul King's fragments. The transition would be natural, intended by the original design. Both of you are advocating for usurpation through murder. Ichibe's spiritual pressure flared. Massive, ancient, terrifying to anyone who possessed Reiyatsu. It washed over Beerus like a gentle breeze. Lord Beerus, I implore you, do not let these rebels manipulate you into destroying the cosmic order. Beerus picked his food back up, chewing thoughtfully. Here's what I think. You're all wrong. 3 pairs of eyes, Aizen's calculating brown, Hashwolf's cold blue, Ichibe's ancient black, fixed on him. Your Soul King isn't a god. He's a battery, a prisoner forced to hold up a system that shouldn't need holding up. Beerus gestured with his chopsticks. In my universe, we have gods. Real gods. Gods of creation, gods of destruction, angels who manage both. And you know what we don't need? Someone suffering eternally to keep reality stable. Reality should be able to exist on its own. The Soul King's cosmology is different, Ichibe began. Because it's broken from the foundation, Beerus interrupted. Aizen's right about that much. A system that requires a slave god to function is a bad system, but, he pointed at Aizen, replacing one tyrant with another doesn't fix anything. You'd just be the new battery, the new prisoner. Different face, same cage. Aizen's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. You see the trap. And you? Beerus addressed Hashwolf. Your Quincy King wants to rebuild from scratch. That sounds good in theory, but reconstruction requires a blueprint. So what's his plan? Another cycle? A different kind of prison? Or something actually new? His Majesty's vision is perfect, Hashwolf replied with absolute conviction. A world without death, without the arbitrary separation of... A world without death is stagnation, Beerus said flatly, his voice carrying the authority of millions of years. I'm a god of destruction. My entire purpose is maintaining cosmic balance through endings. True endings, without death, real permanent death. Universes become cluttered. Life loses meaning. Existence becomes a prison of immortality where nothing can truly change or evolve. He stood, brushing crumbs from his clothing. All 3 representatives tensed. Here's my decision. I'm not helping any of you. Lord Beerus, Aizen began. I'm not finished. Beerus's eyes glowed with purple energy. Your Soul King system is broken. Your rebellions are just different flavors of the same problem. And none of you are asking the right question. Which is? Ichibe asked warily. What if souls could actually end? Beerus let the question hang in the air. Not cycle, not transform, not get absorbed into some cosmic battery. Just end. Peacefully. Finally. Completely. What if death meant death instead of bureaucratic reassignment? The implications crashed through 3 brilliant minds simultaneously. You're suggesting the elimination of the afterlife entirely. Aizen breathed, his genius already extrapolating consequences. I'm suggesting that your universe's fundamental problem is that nothing can truly die. Everything recycles, everything persists. The Soul King holds it all together because someone decided that endings were unacceptable. Beerus crossed his arms. But endings aren't evil. They're necessary. In my universe, when civilizations become stagnant, I destroy them. When planets become problems, I erase them. And you know what? New things grow in their place. Better things. Evolution through destruction. The Soul King's design specifically prevents such destruction, Ichibe said, horror dawning in his ancient eyes. He sealed away the concept of true ending when he separated the realms. That was the entire point, to save souls from the void of non-existence. By trapping them in eternal existence instead, trading one prison for another. Beerus shook his head. Your Soul King isn't maintaining balance. He's preventing the natural cycle of creation and destruction that every healthy universe needs. Are you saying you could fix our cosmology? Harshwalth asked carefully. No, I'm saying your cosmology can't be fixed. It's fundamentally flawed. Beerus began walking toward the edge of Las Noches' roof. But it's not my problem. I'm leaving in about 10 more days, assuming your royal guard can figure out dimensional travel. Until then, I'm staying out of your wars. But surely you must see that your presence here has already altered the balance, Aizen pressed. Every hollow you've erased is a permanent change. You've already intervened, intentionally or not. Those hollows attacked me. Self-defense doesn't count as intervention. Beerus paused at the edge. Though I'll give you all some advice, free of charge. We're listening, Ichibe said. Stop trying to work within the Soul King's system. Stop trying to overthrow it. Stop trying to reconstruct it. Beerus looked out over Hueco Mundo's endless white desert. If you really want change, you need something completely new. A cosmology that allows for true beginnings and true endings. But that would require tearing down everything and starting over. And I don't think any of you have the courage for that. He leaped off the roof, floating down toward the desert floor. The 3 representatives watched him go, each lost in thought. Finally, Aizen spoke. He's right, you know, about the fundamental flaw. His Majesty has always known, Harshwalth replied. That's why the 1,000-year blood war is necessary. The Soul King's sacrifice was made to prevent exactly what Beerus describes, Ichibe said quietly. The void of true non-existence. He chose to imprison himself to save all souls from that fate. And now this entity suggests our salvation was a mistake. Perhaps it was, Aizen mused, his mind already working through possibilities. A god of destruction would see imprisonment as salvation differently than souls who fear ending. To him, our eternal cycle is the prison. His erasure is the freedom. Dangerous philosophy, Ichibe warned. All truth is dangerous, Aizen replied with his characteristic smile. That's what makes it truth. The 3 representatives departed separately, each returning to their faction with troubling news. The entity they'd hoped to recruit as an ally or neutralize as a threat had instead revealed a flaw in their reality so fundamental that it called into question everything they were fighting for. In the Seirei-Te, Captain Commander Yamamoto received Ichibe's report in silence. When the monk finished, the old warrior spoke with uncharacteristic uncertainty. If the entity is correct, if our cosmology is inherently flawed, then our 1,000 years of maintaining balance has been maintaining a prison, Ichibe finished. Yes, I cannot accept that. The Soul King's sacrifice saved us from the void. The Gotei 13 exists to honor that sacrifice by maintaining order. Even if that order is a gilded cage, Yamamoto's spiritual pressure flared with frustration. What would you have me do, old friend? Agree with the destroyer god that everything we've built should be torn down? Accept that our purpose has been prolonging a fundamentally broken system? I don't know, Ichibe admitted, and the confession carried the weight of 1,000,000 years. For the first time since the Soul King established the realms, I genuinely don't know what the right path is. In the Vandenreich, Iwach listened to Harshwalth's report with his 3 eyes gleaming. A god of destruction who advocates for true endings, the Quincy King mused. How fitting! The Soul King sealed away the concept of final death, and now that concept walks among us in physical form. Should we revise our plans? Hashwalth asked. No, we proceed as intended, but now I understand what this entity represents. Huak's smile was beatific and terrible. He is the universe's correction mechanism, a manifestation of what the Soul King tried to prevent. His very existence proves that the current order is unsustainable. His Majesty believes this entity was sent here deliberately. I believe nothing is coincidence. The future I foresaw included my victory over the Soul King. This entity's arrival accelerates that future. Huak's eyes glowed with prophetic certainty. Let the destroyer god remain neutral. His mere presence destabilizes the old order. When the 1,000-year blood war begins, the chaos he's created will serve our purposes perfectly. In Las Noches, Aizen stood in his private chambers, Kyoka Suigetsu unsheathed before him. The Zanpakuto's complete hypnosis reflected his face back at him, or rather, the face he allowed others to see. He called me a future prisoner. Aizen spoke to his reflection. And he's right. Even transcendent power requires maintenance. The Soul King is a prisoner of necessity. I would be simply a more willing one. The Hogyoku pulsed within his chest, responding to his thoughts. But what if there's another way? What if instead of replacing the system or reconstructing it, we could introduce the element it's missing? Aizen's eyes gleamed with renewed purpose. True endings. The Hogyoku grants evolution and transcendence. Could it also grant cessation? The ability to truly end, not just transform? He sheathed his Zanpakuto. I came here seeking to become a god. Perhaps I should be seeking to become something this universe has never had, a god of destruction. The thought was intoxicating, dangerous, revolutionary, and entirely in character for a genius who'd already broken every rule Soul Society held sacred. War beyond death. The fragile peace lasted exactly 7 more days. Beeru had grown accustomed to his routine. Meals delivered by the Royal Guard, increasingly creative as Kirio exhausted Soul Society's archives. Occasional food samples from Askin, who proved surprisingly adept at finding rare delicacies, and long stretches of doing absolutely nothing while the various factions continued their Cold War around him. Then Ichigo Kurosaki arrived in Hueco Mundo, and everything went sideways. The orange-haired substitute Soul Reaper had come to rescue Orihaime Inoue, kidnapped by Aizen as part of some elaborate scheme. He'd brought allies. Uryu Ishida, Chad, Renji, Rukia. Young warriors with potential far exceeding their experience, charging into enemy territory with the reckless confidence of protagonists who didn't yet understand the scale of powers arrayed against them. Beeru was eating century-old dango when he felt the surge of spiritual pressures colliding in Las Noches. Multiple captain-level battles erupting simultaneously. Aizen's Espada engaging Soul Reaper captains who'd followed Ichigo's breach. The carefully maintained standoff shattering into open warfare. Finally, Beeru muttered around his food. Something's happening. He floated toward Las Noches, moving at casual speeds that still covered miles in seconds. By the time he arrived, the palace had become a war zone. Ichigo clashed with Grimjow, the Sexta Espada who'd recovered from his humiliating defeat and now fought with suicidal intensity, his resurrection form fully manifested. The boy was strong, Beeru noted. Not god-strong, but impressive for a hybrid soul barely out of adolescence. His spiritual pressure felt strange. Soul Reaper, Hollow, Quincy, and Human all mixed together in ways that shouldn't be stable. Interesting, Beeru observed from above. That kid's a walking cosmological violation. In another section, Captain Byakuya Kuchiki fought Zomari Roro, the Septima Espada, whose ability to control whatever he looked at created a deadly game of line-of-sight avoidance. Byakuya's Senbonzakura Kageyoshi, thousands of blade petals moving at hypersonic speeds, filled the air with lethal beauty. Captain Kenpachi Zaraki, the battle-mad captain of the 11th Division, had found Neutra Gilga and was engaged in the kind of brutal melee that made even other captains uncomfortable to watch. And throughout it all, Aizen observed from his throne, orchestrating the chaos like a conductor leading a symphony of violence. Beeru landed on a balcony overlooking the throne room just as Ichigo, having defeated Grimjo, burst through the doors. "Aizen!" the boy shouted, his massive Zanpakuto raised. "I'm taking Orihime back." "How dramatic," Aizen replied, not even standing from his throne. "Tell me, Ichigo Kurosaki, do you understand what you've walked into? This isn't a simple rescue. You've entered a war for the future of all existence." "I don't care about your war. I care about my friend." "Of course you do. That admirable simplicity is precisely why you're valuable." Aizen stood, his spiritual pressure expanding to fill the chamber. Even Beerus, immune to Reiyatsu, could perceive the sheer scale of power Aizen had achieved through the Hogyoku's transformations. "But you've arrived at an interesting moment. We have a guest, a true deity who's been observing our conflict. Perhaps he should see what happens when the Soul King's failed design collides with a hybrid potential." Aizen pointed toward Beerus's balcony. Ichigo spun, his instincts screaming danger even though he couldn't sense anything. "That's Beerus," Aizen explained with theatrical flair. "A god of destruction from another universe. He's been quite educational. Would you like to know what he taught me?" "I didn't teach you anything," Beerus called down, annoyed. "Stop using me as a prop in your villain speech." Aizen's smile widened. "On the contrary, you taught me that the Soul King's system requires true endings to function properly, and I've spent the last week studying your Hakai, analyzing the residual energy signatures, understanding the principles. The Hogyoku in his chest pulsed with violet light, the same purple hue as Beerus's destructive energy. Thank you for the demonstration." Beerus's eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" "I evolved." Aizen raised his hand, and purple energy gathered around it. A pale imitation of Hakai, but recognizably similar. "The Hogyoku grants evolution toward any concept I can comprehend. You showed me a power outside the Soul King's framework, so I evolved beyond that framework." He pointed at a hollow pillar supporting part of Las Noches' ceiling. The purple energy lanced out. The pillar didn't shatter. It didn't crumble. It ceased to exist, exactly as if Beerus had erased it himself. The palace groaned as structural integrity failed. "You copied my technique," Beerus said, his voice dangerous. "I evolved toward the concept of true ending," Aizen corrected. "The Hogyoku interpreted your Hakai as a natural evolution of destructive power. And now," he turned back to Ichigo, "let me demonstrate on something more interesting than architecture." The purple energy lanced toward Ichigo. The boy moved with hybrid speed, barely dodging. Where the beam struck, the stone floor was simply gone, not destroyed, erased, deleted from existence. "What the hell is that?" Ichigo demanded, his spiritual pressure spiking defensively. "The evolution of power beyond Soul Society's comprehension," Aizen replied. "Power that could erase the Soul King himself. Power that makes me—" Beerus appeared between them instantly. His hand caught Aizen's wrist, stopping the next erasure blast. The contact generated no shockwave, no explosion of competing energies. Simply absolute cessation of Aizen's attack. "You shouldn't have done that," Beerus said quietly. Aizen looked into the destroyer's god's eyes, and for the first time since achieving transcendence through the Hogyoku, felt fear. Not strategic concern, not calculated risk assessment, pure, primal fear. I merely studied what you demonstrated. You copied my technique without understanding it, without earning it, without the billions of years of existence that make me capable of wielding it responsibly. Beerus's grip tightened. Hakai isn't just power, it's purpose, duty, the weight of knowing that every erasure is final and irreversible. You don't have that understanding. You just wanted a new weapon. Lord Beerus, I assure you. Beerus flicked Aizen in the forehead, the transcendent being shot backward through 6 walls, cratering into the desert outside Las Noches. His Reiyatsu flickered, the Hogyoku working overtime to keep him conscious. Stay here, Beerus told Ichigo, who stood frozen in shock. This won't take long. He vanished, reappearing above Aizen's crater. The former captain climbed from the rubble, his Hogyoku granted regeneration already healing damage. You're angry, I understand, but surely you can see the value of— Shut up. Beerus descended slowly. You're smart, Aizen, really smart, but you don't understand what you've touched. Hakai isn't a technique you can learn. It's what I am, and you tried to steal it through your evolutionary artifact. The Hogyoku grunts. The Hogyoku is a crutch, a shortcut. You wanted transcendence without sacrifice, power without cost, evolution without growth. Beerus landed in front of him. Let me show you the difference between copying a technique and being a god of destruction. Purple energy, true destructive force, refined through eons, gathered around Beerus. Not the pale imitation Aizen had manifested. This was authority over existence itself, the fundamental power of ending. I could erase you right now, Beerus said. Completely. No Hogyoku to bring you back. No soul to recycle, just gone. Do you understand? That's what Hakai means. Not power to be used in schemes. The ultimate responsibility. Aizen's spiritual pressure spiked to maximum. His Zanpakuto appeared in his hand. The Hogyoku pulsed frantically, granting evolution after evolution, seeking any adaptation that could match this threat. Nothing worked. Beerus's erasure energy expanded, and Aizen's evolved defenses simply meant nothing. Like trying to use Reiyatsu against someone who didn't acknowledge Reiyatsu as relevant. Wait, Aizen said, and his voice had lost all pretense. Please. Begging doesn't suit you. Beerus paused, his energy still gathered but not yet released. Give me one reason I shouldn't erase you for your arrogance. Aizen's genius mind raced. What could he possibly offer a being that needed nothing? What argument could sway a deity beyond manipulation? Because I was right, he said finally, about the Soul King system being broken. You said so yourself, and if you erase me now, nothing changes. The cycle continues. The prison persists. But if you let me live, if you let me continue my rebellion, at least I'm trying to change things. By stealing my power and using it for conquest. By using any tool available to break a system that perpetuates suffering. Aizen met Beerus's eyes. You called yourself a god of destruction who maintains cosmic balance. Isn't a failed cosmology exactly what you're supposed to destroy? Beerus considered this. The arrogant genius had a point, however self-serving. I'm not destroying this universe's system, Beerus said finally. That's not my job. I maintain balance in my universe, not yours. But the erasure energy dissipated. You're right, the change is needed. So here's the deal. I'm taking back the Hakai you stole. The Hogyoku granted it through evolution. I don't care. It's mine. Beerus placed a hand on Aizen's chest, right where the Hogyoku rested. Divine energy flowed, not destroying, but reclaiming. The pale purple erasure power that Aizen had manifested was pulled away, reabsorbed into its original source. Aizen gasped, feeling a hole open in his power set where the copied technique had been. There, Beerus said. Now you're back to being regularly transcendent instead of dangerously transcendent. You can keep your Hogyoku, keep your rebellion, keep your schemes, but Hakai is off limits. Understood? Understood, Aizen managed, his pride wounded but his intellect recognizing he had no choice. Good. Beerus turned away. And Aizen, next time you want to copy a god's technique, ask first. It's polite. He flew back toward Las Noches, leaving Aizen in his crater, simultaneously humiliated and grateful to still exist. Inside the palace, Ichigo had watched the entire exchange through the massive holes in the walls. When Beerus returned, the boy's instincts screamed conflicting messages. This being was dangerous, but not hostile, powerful beyond comprehension, but currently just tired. You're Ichigo, right? Beerus asked, landing nearby. The hybrid kid everyone's been fighting over? Yeah. Ichigo kept his Zanpakuto ready, though he had no illusions it would help if this god decided to fight. You've got interesting energy. Soul Reaper, Hollow, Quincy, Human. That shouldn't be stable. Beerus peered at him with genuine curiosity. How are you not exploding from conflicting spiritual pressures? I don't know. I just am. Ichigo lowered his sword slightly. Are you going to fight me? Why would I fight you? You're not threatening me, and I'm not part of any of these factions. Beerus sat down on a piece of rubble. Go rescue your friend. That's what you came for, right? You're just letting me go? Kid, I'm a god of destruction from another universe. Your local wars aren't my problem. Beerus waved dismissively. Though I'll give you some advice. Stop letting people use you as a chess piece. Aizen wants you for your potential. Soul Society wants to control you. Everyone's got plans for the powerful hybrid. But you know what actually matters? What? Whether you choose your own path. Power without agency is just being a weapon someone else wields. Beerus stood. Now go. Your friends are fighting Espada in the other wings, and some of them are losing. Ichigo hesitated, then nodded and ran deeper into Las Noches. Beerus watched him go, then sensed multiple presences approaching. The Royal Guard, responding to the massive power fluctuations, and behind them, more Soul Reaper captains who'd breached Hueco Mundo when Ichigo's assault created openings. This is going to become a whole thing, Beerus muttered. He was right. Within the hour, Las Noches had become the staging ground for the largest battle since Soul Society's founding. Captains versus Espada, Soul Reapers versus Arancor, Aizen's transcendent power versus the combined might of the Gotei 13. And through it all, Beerus sat on his balcony, eating food delivered by a very stressed Askin, watching the war unfold like a cosmic spectator sport. You're not going to help either side? Askin asked, ducking as a stray Zero beam obliterated the wall above them. Not my war, Beerus replied, selecting another dumpling. Though I have to admit it's entertaining. That old guy with the flames, he's pretty strong. He was referring to Captain Commander Yamamoto, who'd finally entered the battle personally. The oldest Soul Reaper's spiritual pressure was apocalyptic. His Zanpakuto's flames hot enough to threaten Soul Society itself, if fully released. He's the strongest captain, Askin confirmed, though even he's careful with his full power. His Bankai could destroy everything if he's not precise. Sounds like my kind of fighter. Beerus watched with interest as Yamamoto engaged multiple Espada simultaneously. Though he's holding back, fighting cautiously, that's his mistake. What would you do? If I was fighting? Beerus smiled. I'd stop worrying about collateral damage and just win. But that's the difference between gods and mortals. We can afford to be destructive. You have to worry about what you'll destroy in the process. The battle raged for hours. Captains fell and rose. Espada were defeated one by one. Ichigo fought his way to Oriheim, rescued her, and began the retreat. Aizen, recovered from his encounter with Beeru, stood apart from the main fighting, letting his espada test Soul Society's strength while he calculated his next move. And then everything stopped. A presence descended on Hueco Mundo that made every combatant freeze. Spiritual pressure so vast it dwarfed even Yamamoto's flames, or Aizen's transcendent power. The royal guard had decided enough was enough. Ichibe Hyosube appeared in the center of the battlefield, his massive form radiating authority that predated Soul Society itself. "This conflict ends now. You have no authority here," Aizen replied, his voice calm despite facing beings who could erase his name from existence. "We have absolute authority anywhere. The Soul King's law reaches." Ichibe's eyes fixed on Aizen. "Your rebellion threatens the cosmic balance. Stand down or be erased." "Try it," Aizen challenged. "I've evolved beyond the Soul King's framework. Your powers won't—" "Stop!" Beerus's voice cut through the tension. He floated down from his balcony, drawing every eye. "This is getting boring." "Lord Beerus," Ichibe bowed respectfully, "please stand aside. This doesn't concern me." "You're right, it doesn't." Beerus looked between Aizen, the royal guard, the assembled captains, and the surviving espada. "But you're all making the same mistake. You're so busy fighting over who gets to be in charge of a broken system that you've forgotten to ask if the system should exist at all. The Soul King's design has maintained existence for millions of years," Ichibe protested, "and I maintain cosmic balance in my universe by destroying things that have outlived their purpose." Beerus's eyes glowed. "Maybe your universe needs a god of destruction. Maybe this whole setup, the Soul King, the cycle, the balance, all of it, has become exactly the kind of stagnant system I'd normally erase." Every being present tensed. "Are you threatening to destroy our cosmology?" Yamamoto asked, his flames flickering with readiness despite the futility. "No. I'm pointing out that you're all so trapped in your paradigms that you can't see outside them." Beerus crossed his arms. "Aizen wants to transcend the system. The Quincy want to rebuild it. Soul Society wants to maintain it. But none of you are asking whether existence needs a cycle at all. Whether souls need to be trapped in eternal persistence. Whether the Soul King's sacrifice was actually salvation or the original sin. Those are dangerous questions," Ichibe said quietly. "All good questions are dangerous." Beerus turned to leave. "I'm done watching this fight. It's just going to keep repeating. Rebellion, suppression, uneasy peace, new rebellion, until someone has the courage to actually change the fundamental rules. But that's not me. I'm just passing through." He flew toward the dimensional barrier, toward the rift that Senjumaru had been preparing as his exit route. "Wait," Aizen called. "You're leaving, just like that. My entertainment value has run out. Your wars are cyclical and pointless, and I've been away from my universe long enough." Beerus paused at the boundary between Hueco Mundo and the dimensional void. "But I'll leave you with this. Your universe is dying. Slowly. The Soul King system is hemorrhaging energy. The balance is failing. You've got maybe 1,000 years, possibly less, before the whole thing collapses into chaos. What you do with that knowledge is your choice." "How do you know this?" Ichibe demanded. "Because I can see it. Cosmologies have energy signatures. Yours is dimming." Beerus looked back one last time. "Good luck figuring out what comes next. You're going to need it." He vanished through the dimensional rift, returning to his own universe, leaving behind a battlefield full of beings who just learned their reality had an expiration date. A soul written into history. The dimensional rift sealed behind Beerus, leaving Hueco Mundo's white desert eerily silent. Combatants who'd been locked in mortal combat moments before stood frozen, processing the Destroyer God's final revelation. 1,000 years. Captain Kuchiki whispered, his aristocratic composure cracking. The Soul King system is failing. He could be lying, Hitsugaya said, but his voice lacked conviction. Trying to destabilize us psychologically. Gods don't lie. Unohana spoke with the certainty of someone who'd existed long enough to recognize truth when she heard it. They have no need to, and everything he said aligns with observations we've been ignoring for centuries. Ichibe Hayosube stood in the center of the battlefield, his ancient face troubled. The Royal Guard has detected anomalies in the dimensional fabric, fluctuations in the soul current, minor instabilities we attributed to Aizen's experiments or hollow activity. But if the entity is correct, if the cosmology itself is degrading, then everything we're fighting for is temporary. Aizen finished, his mind already racing through implications. He'd emerged from the rubble of Las Noches, his transcendent form slightly diminished, but still formidable. Interesting, very interesting indeed. You sound pleased, Yamamoto observed, his flames still active, but lowered. The end of all existence doesn't trouble you? On the contrary, it clarifies everything. Aizen's smile returned. We're not fighting over the future of an eternal system. We're fighting over how to spend our final millennium. That changes the strategy considerably. His Majesty has foreseen this, Harshwalth spoke, having observed the entire battle from dimensional shadows. The Quincy lieutenant stepped into view, his blue eyes cold. The Soul King's failure is inevitable. The 1,000-year blood war will come. But now we know the timeline. 1,000 years to prepare the reconstruction. Or 1,000 years to find another solution, Ichigo interjected. The substitute Soul Reaper stood with Orihime beside him, his friends gathered close. You're all talking like the end is certain. What if it's not? What if there's a way to fix the system instead of replacing it or letting it die? The child raises a valid point, Unohana acknowledged. We have knowledge now that we lacked before. A divine perspective on our cosmology's flaws. Perhaps that knowledge is the tool we need. Or perhaps, Aizen said, it's the confirmation that my path was correct all along. Transcendence isn't about maintaining the broken system. It's about preparing for what comes after. Enough philosophy, Yamamoto commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Royal Guard, what are your orders? Do we continue this battle, or do we reassess our priorities in light of this revelation? Ichibe considered carefully. The war that had seemed so urgent moments ago now appeared in different context. If the cosmology truly had only a millennium remaining, then conflicts between factions became less about eternal order and more about legacy, about what would survive the inevitable collapse. We withdraw, Ichibe decided. Soul Society forces will return to the Seraitai. Aizen, your rebellion is postponed, not pardoned. We have larger concerns than factional disputes. How diplomatic, Aizen replied with amusement. Very well. My Espada need time to recover anyway, and I have much to consider about this new timeline. The Quincy will also withdraw, Harshwalth announced. His Majesty's vision extends beyond this skirmish. We will prepare for the true war, the one that determines what survives the Soul King's death. The three factions separated gradually, warriors eyeing each other with wary respect rather than active hostility. The Destroyer God's departure had changed something fundamental. Not allegiances, those remained opposed, but perspective. They were no longer fighting over eternal stakes. They were fighting over how their universe would end and what might be built from the ruins. 3 days later, in Soul Society's Central 46 chambers, an emergency council convened. Captains, nobles, royal guard, every power faction represented. We must address the entity's claims, Captain Commander Yamamoto opened the session. If our cosmology truly faces collapse in a millennium, we cannot simply continue as before. We need strategies, plans, research. Captain Kurotsuchi has been analyzing the dimensional data from the entity's departure. Ichibe reported. His findings are troubling. Mayuri stepped forward, his painted face grave. The entity was correct. I've detected progressive degradation in the soul cycle's efficiency. Souls are taking marginally longer to process through each realm. The spiritual pressure baseline has decreased by 0.03% over the last century. Individually, these are negligible fluctuations. Collectively, they indicate systemic failure. Silence greeted this confirmation. Extrapolating current rates, Mayuri continued, we have approximately 900 years before cascade failure. At that point, the separation between realms will collapse. Life and death will lose distinction. The Soul King will no longer be able to maintain the dimensional barriers. 900 years, Byakuya repeated. Less than the entity estimated. It was approximating. I have exact calculations. Mayuri displayed complex equations that made several nobles' eyes glaze over. The question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? We find a solution, Hitsugaya said firmly. We're soul reapers. Protecting souls is our purpose. If the system is failing, we fix it. Fix it how? Shunsui asked, his usual playfulness absent. We don't know why the Soul King's design is degrading. We don't understand the underlying principles well enough to repair them, and we certainly don't have a replacement framework. Aizen believes he can transcend the Soul King, Unohana noted. His Hogyoku grants evolution toward any concept. Perhaps he could evolve into a replacement. Allowing Aizen to replace the Soul King is unacceptable, Yamamoto stated flatly. We'd be trading one prisoner for another, and we have no guarantee his version would be better. The Quincy claim they can rebuild from scratch, Ichibe added. Wach contains fragments of the Soul King's original power. In theory, he could absorb the complete Soul King and reconstruct reality according to Quincy ideals, which would eradicate hollows entirely and likely eliminate Soul Reapers as well, Mayuri pointed out. Their ideology views us as contamination, not ideal. What about what the entity suggested? Ichigo spoke up from where he sat with the other captains, technically present as a substitute Soul Reaper consultant. He said we should stop trying to work within the Soul King system. What if we built something completely new? A fascinating proposal with zero practical application, Mayuri replied acidly. Building a new cosmology from scratch would require power equivalent to the Soul King's original sacrifice. We don't have that. We don't even have a blueprint for what such a cosmology would look like. But we have time, Ichigo pressed. 900 years, that's enough to figure something out, isn't it? Or it's enough time to watch our civilization slowly collapse while we argue about solutions, Shunsui countered. I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but we need realistic plans. The debate continued for hours, producing more questions than answers. By the time the council adjourned, they'd agreed on only a few basic points. The degradation would be monitored continuously. Research into alternative cosmological structures would begin immediately. All factions, even enemies, would be informed of the timeline. Preparations for evacuation scenarios would be developed. The Soul King would be studied more intensively. Despite the taboo, it was a start. Barely. In Last Nox, Aizen stood before his throne, the Hogyoku pulsing steadily in his chest. The war had ended inconclusively, but his mind had gained something more valuable than victory. Clarity. Ulquiorra, he addressed the Quattro Espada, who stood in attendance. Your observations on the entity? It possessed power fundamentally different from our framework, Ulquiorra replied in his monotone. Not superior reiyatsu, not advanced technique, simply orthogonal to our reality's rules. As if it existed on an axis we'd lack the dimensions to perceive. Precisely, and that's the key. Aizen's eyes gleamed. The Hogyoku grants evolution toward concepts I can comprehend. I comprehended the entity's erasure power and evolved toward it. But the evolution was superficial, a copy without understanding, because I was still operating within the Soul King's framework. You wish to evolve outside the framework entirely. I wish to understand what outside even means. Aizen touched the Hogyoku. This artifact was created by fusing Soul Reaper and Hollow powers, two aspects of the Soul King system. But what if there are other systems, other cosmologies? The entity proved they exist. If I could evolve beyond just transcendence within our universe, to transcendence of universal boundaries themselves, you would become something unprecedented. I would become what the Soul King failed to be, a being capable of creating cosmologies, not just maintaining them. Aizen's smile was genuine now, lit by ambition that had found new horizons. 900 years, more than enough time to achieve impossible evolution. In the Vandenreich, Yuak sat upon his throne, his three eyes perceiving futures that had suddenly become far more complex. The Destroyer God's revelation has altered the timeline, he spoke to his assembled stern Ritter. The future I foresaw, my victory over the Soul King, the reconstruction of the world, remains intact, but the context has changed. Because the Soul King's death is now inevitable regardless of our actions, Harshwolf interpreted. Precisely. We're no longer rebels destroying a stable system. We're revolutionaries accelerating an inevitable collapse and preparing to build from the ruins. Yuach's smile was beatific. It changes our strategy entirely. We don't need to defeat Soul Society. We simply need to outlast them, to be the faction with the best plan for what comes after. And our plan is to absorb the Soul King's power completely, to use his essence as the foundation for a new cosmology, one without the arbitrary separation of life and death, without the cycle of suffering, without the need for imprisoned God maintaining balance. Yuak's eyes glowed with prophetic certainty. The Destroyer God showed us that endings can be final, not cyclical. I will create a world where death means death, but on our terms, where souls can rest peacefully instead of being recycled eternally. A world without hollows or soul reapers, Askin observed. Just life and death. Natural. Simple. Exactly. Yuash stood, his spiritual pressure expanding to fill the chamber. We have 900 years to prepare, to gather strength, to ensure that when the Soul King system fails, we are ready to replace it with something better. 5 years passed. Beeru returned to his universe, had mostly forgotten about his interdimensional detour. It had been a mildly interesting diversion. Decent food, acceptable entertainment, some philosophical discussions that made him think briefly about the nature of destruction and balance. Whis, his angelic attendant, had been quite amused by the story. So you accidentally changed the course of an entire cosmology's development just by existing there and being honest about their flaws? The angel asked, sipping tea. I guess. Beeru stretched on his planet, watching stars wheel overhead. They had a broken system and refused to acknowledge it. I just pointed out the obvious. And now they're racing to find a solution before their universe collapses. Not my problem. I'm sure they'll figure something out, or they won't, and their cosmology will reset to primordial chaos, and something new will emerge. That's how these things work. How very destructive of you, Whis observed with a smile. It's what I do. Beeru yawned. Speaking of which, are there any planets on my destruction schedule today? 3. Though I should mention that one of them is Lord Shampa's favorite restaurant planet. Oh no, really? Beeru groaned. He's going to be so annoying about that. Perhaps we could negotiate? No, if it's scheduled, it gets destroyed. That's the job. Beeru stood, stretching. Besides, Shampa needs to learn not to get too attached to mortal establishments. They're temporary by nature. He launched into space, ready to fulfill his purpose as a god of destruction, already moving on to the next task in an eternal duty that spanned universes and eons. Behind him, the universe he'd briefly visited continued its accelerated trajectory toward transformation or collapse. Whether the souls of that cosmology would find salvation, destruction, or something unprecedented remained to be seen. But the god of destruction who'd catalyzed their crisis had already moved on, doing what he'd always done, maintaining cosmic balance through endings, making space for new beginnings, and occasionally complaining about mediocre food. It was, after all, what gods of destruction did. The balance of souls, it turned out, had never been final. In the years following Beerus's departure, the three realms transformed in ways no one had predicted. Aizen continued his research into transcendence beyond cosmological boundaries, the Hogyoku evolution granting him insights into the nature of reality itself. Soul Society established the Division of Cosmological Research, tasking brilliant minds with understanding why their universe was failing and how to prevent, or survive, the collapse. The Quincy prepared in shadow, refining their vision of a reconstructed world without the Soul King's flawed design. And Ichigo Kurosaki, the hybrid boy who'd rescued his friend and inadvertently witnessed a god's casual restructuring of cosmic paradigms, grew stronger. His unique nature, Soul, Reaper, Hollow, Quincy, and Human merged into one, represented something the Destroyer God had recognized. A bridge between the old system and something new. Perhaps that was why Beerus had let him live, let him continue his journey. The 1,000-year blood war would come, as Yawach had foreseen. The battles between factions would escalate. Soul Society would face existential threats that made their previous conflicts seem trivial. But now they fought with different understanding. They weren't just defending an eternal order, they were buying time to build something better, to find the courage Beerus had, challenged them to find, the courage to tear down everything and start over. Because the Destroyer God had been right about one fundamental truth. A system that required an imprisoned slave god to function was no system at all. It was a slow-motion catastrophe, postponing inevitable failure through suffering. Whether they would succeed in building something better remained uncertain. Whether the Soul King's cycle could be replaced with true creation and true destruction, life that ended and death that meant death, was unknown. But for the first time in millions of years, the beings of that cosmology were asking the right questions. And sometimes, the right questions mattered more than perfect answers. In Hueco Mundo, where Beerus had first arrived, the sand where he'd stood remained fundamentally altered. It no longer quite fit into the spiritual pressure framework that governed the realm. Hollows avoided it instinctively, sensing something their nature couldn't comprehend. It was a scar on reality, a reminder that their universe had been touched by something from outside, something that had looked at their cosmic order and found it wanting. The scar would persist long after the Soul King system finally failed, long after whatever came next emerged from the chaos. A permanent mark proving that even in a universe where nothing truly ended, where the cycle was supposed to be eternal, true endings were possible. You just needed a god bored enough to demonstrate it.